For as long as humans have been eating meat, we've wondered, what would it be like if our food tried to eat us? What about a carnivorous cow? What about a killer pig? The Entelodont family of the ancient past could grow to be the size of a bison, but had cloven hooves and killer teeth. Learn more about how these carnivorous land hippos flipped the script on Old MacDonald. In the modern world of mammal evolution, having hooves is synonymous with being an herbivore. While goats and pigs will sometimes scavenge or snap up unsuspecting small animals like mice or baby birds, the idea of a big hoofed mammal like a cow or a moose waking up each day and chasing after a meal seems like something from a strange nightmare. But in the aftermath of the dinosaur extinction, predators like bears, cats, and dogs hadn't evolved yet. Instead, land-dwelling cousins of hippos that looked like giant meat-eating pigs made this strange nightmare a terrifying reality for the evolving mammals who had survived the extinction event. But these killer hell hippos, formerly known as entelodonts, weren't just predators. The name entelodont means perfect tooth, referring to omnivorous jaws inherited from the earliest insect and nut-eating mammals that let them crunch up trees at the same time as they crushed bones. Like all mammal lineages that survived the extinction event, the earliest of these animals were small. The first known hell hippo was a piglet-sized creature called Proentelodon. While small, this animal already had the hallmarks of the traits that would make bigger descendants so successful in the starting part of the Cenozoic. The perfect teeth entelodonts inherited from the earliest mammals were a flexible set of herbivorous and carnivorous tooth types. Most mammal species lost some of these tooth types as they evolved specialized diets, but entelodons retained them all. This let them cut through meat, grind through tough plants, and chip away at roots, nuts, and bones before crushing them up in equal measure, letting them eat just about any part of the forest environments they lived in. The other secret to the entelodon's success comes from their gigantic jaw muscles, which were attached to their skulls by the huge flares of bone growing out of their cheeks and their lower jaws. You can see these huge mandible attachment sites on the skulls of the Archaeotherium that we talk about in the video in this clip. Combined with a fused chin bone and a strong support structure on the roof of the mouth, this let entelodons bite down on almost anything they liked with enough force to bite some of their prey clean in two.
Hi, I'm Dr. Danielle Fraser, and I'm head of paleobiology here at the Canadian Museum of Nature, and I'm a research scientist in mammalian paleoecology. That means I study the ecology of ancient mammals. So, for example, what they eat and what they did in the environments in which they live. I'm standing here with some entelodont specimens. Entelodonts are often referred to as hell pigs. The name entelodont means perfect teeth, and this is because they perfectly match that ancestral number of teeth in each quadrant of the mouth. And here is a nice set of mandibles from Archaeotherium. Now, Archaeotherium and entelodonts in general have what we call the ancestral mammalian condition, in that they have 3 incisors, 1 canine, 4 premolars, and 3 molars in each quadrant of the mouth. In a lot of mammalian clades, particularly in a lot of herbivorous clades, and in species like cats, who are obviously carnivorous, we see the reduction of tooth numbers. For example, cats have lost most of their premolars, but in Archaeotherium we don't see this. Why is that? In a lot of cases, we think that it's because they were omnivorous. Omnivory is the ability to feed on a variety of foods, including meats and plants and tubers and potentially fruits and seeds. And what having this set of teeth does is allow you to feed on a variety of food items. It's a very flexible system for processing food in the mouth.
As entelodonts continued to grow, later species evolved a bison-like hump that helped support their even bigger skulls and the even bigger muscles that they were growing to power them. Their ability to eat so many different types of tough food led to the entelodont's success, with Proentelodon leading to larger, peccary-sized hell hippos like Brachyhyops spreading south to China, west to Europe, and east across a land bridge to North America. By the end of the late Eocene, about 37 million years ago, there were entelodonts living on every continent in the northern hemisphere, living very different types of lifestyles. Studies on the dentition of European entelodonts from the late Eocene and early Oligocene, called Entelodon magnus, suggested that they lived like more carnivorous versions of wild boars, primarily eating tree roots, nuts, and branches, while retaining adaptations for slicing through meat when they needed to supplement their diet of tough forest plants. The size of these European hell hippos and their Asian counterpart Entelodon major dwarfed even the largest of modern wild boars. These cow-sized giants stood 50 centimeters taller than even the largest modern wild boars, and grew to almost twice the height of their North American cousins. The predators they lived alongside made these huge sizes a necessity, as fellow carnivore and potential rival Hyenodon had a species here in Asia called Hyenodon gigas that grew to be the size of a rhino. Entelodonts of Asia and Europe had to be big enough to fight back in case these giant predators tried to make a meal out of them, or even compete with them for meat at a carcass. While the entelodonts of Oligocene North America were smaller than their European and Asian counterparts, they made up for it with a fossil record of ferocious predatory behavior. The entelodont of the time, Archaeotherium, was about the size of a black bear and weighed up to 500 pounds. Though entelodons of France and Asia at the time often turned their massive jaws onto crushing roots and tree branches, evidence suggests Archaeotherium spent much of its time as an active predator. Fossils of early camels about the size of a small deer, called Probrotherium, show signs of Archaeotherium snapping their necks with bites to the side of their vertebrae, as well as trackways showing the entelodont's distinctive hoof prints chasing after the tracks of the early camels. A group of 7 individual camel skeletons, all buried together with similar patterns of injury from the jaws of an Archaeotherium, suggest that the land hippos would store the bodies of their prey for later in caches, the way modern foxes and coyotes do. Archaeotherium's jaws were powerful enough to crush the bones of early camels in half, with the backsides often crushed all in one go according to the pattern of injury. But they could also be more delicate, stripping leaves off of branches without crushing the branch itself. Because entelodont teeth weren't built for slicing like a dedicated predator or grazing like a dedicated herbivore, the wear on their teeth shows that they had to use the powerful jaw and neck muscles on their body to pull and tear apart their prey, as well as the hardy plants they were eating, then crush them up with their huge jaw strength. Living alongside Archaeotherium were a slew of more dedicated predators filling all kinds of niches, especially in the White River Formation of Wyoming. Here, predators like the leopard-sized false saber-tooth Hoplophonius occidentalis and the wolf-sized Hyenodon horridus were common, as were the giant terror bird relatives called bathornids, covered in another video on this YouTube channel. Giant birds like Paracrax and Bathornis geographicus would have competed for the same prey as entelodonts. Despite all of these competitors, the biggest threat posed to Archaeotherium and its fellow entelodonts were often others of its own kind. Like modern-day hippos, the hell hippos of the distant past had jaws built to spread wide, up to 108 degrees in some species, allowing them to show off their gigantic sets of teeth to other hell hippos. But just like modern hippos, if showing off the teeth wasn't enough, the hell hippos would use them to fight one another. The same giant jaw muscles used for biting and crushing tough food that all hell hippos boasted were often turned on one another during times of competition. Entelodon skulls of multiple species show horrible wounds left by another entelodont's giant teeth, with biting one another on their large and sensitive noses being especially common. But hell hippos were built tough, and the fossil record also shows signs of even these deep puncture wounds healing over. While entelodonts could survive the vicious bites of their own kind and a whole slew of competitors and predators, from bathornids competing with them in North America to giant hyenodonts preying on them in Asia, like the bathornids and hyenodonts that challenged them, they were not immune to the extinction event that came about at the end of the Oligocene. Entelodonts were adapted to forests and lush marshes or floodplains, with hooves that could travel over rough terrain and cross country easily, but weren't adapted for long stretches of open grass. At the end of the Oligocene, a sharp, sudden dry spell caused the forests and marshes they called home to suddenly shift to open grasslands. The entelodon's perfect teeth, so good at crushing branches and roots, weren't adapted for eating grasses, and neither were the teeth of their prey. Mass die-offs of rhinos from the time period speak to the drought conditions that animals in North America and Asia were facing, and most of the entelodont family didn't survive the transition from the end of the Oligocene to the start of the Miocene. By the beginning of the Miocene, there were only 2 surviving species of hell hippo, Para-Entelodon from the late Oligocene and early Miocene of Mongolia and China, and Daeodon from the late Oligocene and early and middle Miocene of North America. These last of the entelodonts were also the biggest, with both species weighing up to a ton, growing as large as 2 meters tall at the shoulder and being an impressive 3 meters long at the largest estimates. With the cooling and drying spell of the Miocene wiping out the hyenodons and North American terror bird relatives from before, these rhino-sized giants were the uncontested top predators of the era. Analysis of Daeodon's teeth show that they took full advantage of every prey item they took down. With fewer trees to crunch through, the last of the entelodonts evolved specialized layers of enamel perfect for crushing bones open. Wear patterns on their teeth match the kind that hyena teeth take from cracking open bones that they use to devour entire carcasses, and entelodont tooth marks left on strange horse-sized mammals called calicotheres show they were targeting larger animals than their ancestors. Many of these adaptations are consistent with a scavenger taking advantage of all the drought and starvation occurring in North America at the time, but strangely, fossils and tooth marks from Daeodon are not found near the mass graves of early rhinos caused by these severe droughts. Some scientists point to tooth wear showing that Daeodon was eating hardy, water-filled plants like grapevines and tree roots during the droughts, suggesting that when times were hard, they at least partially switched to a herbivore diet that were causing mass die-offs in their prey. Eventually, though, even these many adaptations to the colder and drier early Miocene were not enough. The same extinction event that had spelled the end of their competitors, the bathornids and the hyenodons before them, eventually claimed the entelodons too. It's not entirely clear why, but some scientists believe that in the open grassland environments of the Miocene, the prey evolved to outrun entelodons. The cloven hooves that had helped them travel over forests and through marshes were not built for speed, leaving them without big, tough plants like trees to eat and unable to catch the prey items that they had turned to instead. However they went extinct, the last of the hell hippos disappeared about 15 million years ago, with more familiar and dedicated carnivores like cats and bears taking their place. Never again would a giant omnivore with a skull that could crush anything evolve among the mammals, and today the idea of hoofed mammal predators seems strange to us. When we look at their closest living relatives, however, the idea does become easier to understand. The hippos of the modern day use their huge, tusked mouths to brutally fight one another the same way entelodons used to. Hippos have a very deserved reputation for being terrifyingly aggressive and dangerous animals, killing more people every year than any other mammal in Africa, including lions, leopards, and hyenas. What's more, hippos grow even bigger than the biggest entelodons did, being the second largest land animals after elephants. While entelodons had the strength to bite early dog-sized camels in two, hippos have the raw strength needed to rip an adult Nile crocodile in half. With this modern window into how ferocious their land-dwelling carnivorous cousins would have been, hippos, and their extinct cousins, prove that some plant eaters we associate with peaceful farm life today are still best enjoyed at a far distance.
So entelodonts are known for a variety of flanges and bosses that come off For example, here, the jugal, which is your cheekbone, or the back part of the mandible, as shown here, and here in this specimen, as well as bosses that come off of what we call the ventral or bottom side of the mandible. We see these in some living animals, such as giant hogs, and some sloths. So this flange in particular has been ascribed a variety of purposes. One is display. So you can imagine an animal with this flesh covered with these huge phalanges. That would be quite visually exciting. But also it's been ascribed the purpose of muscle attachment. So one of the major muscles that comes down through here is a muscle that's important for processing vegetation. It's called the masseter muscle. It's important for side-to-side movement of the jaw. And there's some evidence that there are muscle scars on the inside of these flanges, which suggest increased area of attachment for that muscle, allowing these animals to chew really, really well. Similarly, these flanges on the back of the mandible that you see here and here are important for muscle attachment on the inner surface and outer surface. So typically that same muscle that I was just talking about, that muscle responsible for side-to-side jaw movement, the masseter, attaches here. But on the inside, we have another muscle that opposes the masseter muscle, that opposes that muscle on the outside. It's called the digastric muscle. And that's really important when you think about how mammals chew, particularly herbivorous mammals. That is that side-to-side jaw movement. So think about a cow chewing cud in the field. We've all seen that. It's those muscles that are responsible for that chewing movement. Another huge bony flange or ridge that you'll see on entelodonts, and in fact other mammals, particularly carnivorous mammals, is here on the top of the skull. This is where a major jaw opening muscle attaches. This is called the temporalis muscle. This tends to be really big in carnivorous animals like cats and dogs. And so it's really interesting to see this in an animal related to cows, pigs, sheep, and other taxa like that. This could have been responsible for allowing the animal to undertake predatory behavior. So it's thought that entelodonts were omnivorous, so they ate both plants and animals. But also, it's thought that they were able to open their mouths really wide in the way that hippopotami do. So this may also have just been for display behavior. In all likelihood, it's some combination thereof. There's another set of ridges or bony flanges, we call them, here on that ventral side of the mandible or the lower jaw. It's really not clear what the purpose of these was. There's not a lot of musculature that's attached here on that front of that jaw. So I imagine that it was probably for display. These would have been really visually stunning and potentially scary animals.